Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I am so happy to be with you this Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening or whatever time it is you're watching this. So today we are actually streaming in 3 different places. So we are streaming here on YouTube. We are streaming on Facebook on my Facebook page, and we are also streaming on Rumble. So hello everyone that is from all those different platforms. And we're only going to be taking questions from Rumble and YouTube today. So if you have a question that you want to get answered, head on down to Rumble or YouTube if you're on Facebook, and you can ask that question in the live chat, and then I can potentially answer that for you. So the way that you're going to get a question answered today is if you put in capital letters question in front of your question, and that just notifies Wolf that you're asking a question and you're not just chatting away with everyone in the chat today. So I think that's pretty much it. Let's get going. So this first question is going to be from APB. Hello, APB. And you asked, can you speak about geoengineering? I've definitely noticed a sharp increase within the last 6 months. Isaiah 57:17. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. Love you and thank you. Well, I've actually heard and kind of noticed a lot more conversations about geoengineering, which is usually associated with things like chemtrails or weather modification, sort of various things like that. And one thing that we really have to understand, and that if we can factor in, we will really grasp what's happening in the world today and sort of where the world is going. And that is that there is a huge push to make the earth synthetic and to also make humanity synthetic. So there's a huge push by certain groups on the planet that want to make the earth synthetic, so kind of remove her organic nature, and also make human beings synthetic, because organic life and organic evolution is a threat, and it is considered, in their paradigm, they think that everything organic should be dominated. And there's a desire to play God within that ideology. I go very deep into this ideology here on my channel and also in Mars Mysteries. So there is this intense desire by certain individuals to make the world synthetic, to throw it off its natural balance, to throw it off its natural harmony, so that you can play God. So kind of to replace it with something else, something inorganic, something synthetic. Okay. And so this is happening within the human being and also within the world. And so a lot of the geoengineering stuff, a lot of various things going on in the world with us as people, these are to move us into a synthetic way of life and really what I would call an inorganic timeline or a synthetic timeline, where if you follow that timeline and if you go down that path, eventually the planet will be unrecognizable and there will be nothing else left. And the human being will be unrecognizable and will be completely mutated and will no longer represent the cosmos in itself. The body will no longer be that temple space, that direct representation of the cosmos, and it will be deformed. And so that is the inorganic timeline, and that is the synthetic impulse or the synthetic timeline. And in esoteric Christianity, that would be what I would call the Antichrist impulse. And so it's really important that we understand that, because once we can grasp that there is this group of people out there that literally want to take natural life and the natural human being and turn it into something else, in their mind, they're not thinking, oh, I'm turning this into I'm moving in a divergent direction. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking, I'm a genius and I'm going to create life in my image. And I'm brilliant and I'm going to find a better way to create a blueberry and a better way to create milk or a better way to create what God has already created. And that is not what we are being called to do at this time in this evolutionary cycle that we are in. We are called to go inward. We are called to live a more natural life, to actually move back in harmony with the planet and back in harmony with our body, and refuse this track of life that is completely materialistic, completely reductionist, that is driven by complete scientific materialism. Including a weird and bizarre and dangerous brand of spirituality that is driven by scientific materialism that doesn't even represent spirituality anymore at all. It's a weird sort of scientific version of every creation myth you could imagine. So this is where we are in society, and we have to understand that. So we could be looking at lots more pushes. I mean, if you look at what Bill Gates is doing with Beyond Meat, and these various groups want to synthesize everything they can. They don't want to have just a real apple or just like a real tomato. No, they have to create the tomato and make the tomato better by genetic engineering, hybridization. It's a disease. It's a mental and spiritual disease. All right. Next question. Henry C. Gigi, can you talk about the spiritual evolution of animals? Are they evolving in the same way as humans, or are they on a separate path to us? Why do we share the same world? So animals are extremely spiritual in their consciousness, but they have a different consciousness. So we have many different kingdoms of life on this planet. We have the mineral kingdom, which includes mineral consciousness, so rocks, crystals, stones, and all of that, which have a complete consciousness to them and a function in the whole. And then we have the plant kingdom, which is also a completely separate consciousness in the mineral kingdom, and is sort of creating this layer of consciousness in itself on the planet as well. And then we have the animal kingdom, and the animal kingdom is also its own sort of strata of consciousness. And then we have the human kingdom, or human consciousness. And so each kingdom is different, meaning they have a completely different perspective. They perceive the world differently. And so it's every single one of them has their own sort of spirituality. And so it's difficult to like compare, a human being and their spirituality to that of like a dog or an animal or to a plant. But when we do combine them all, they all work very harmonious together. And so what's really interesting about this is that in the Eastern traditions, there was a point on the planet where, they would talk about how the souls would have to come up through every single one of the kingdoms, and how within the human being exists every single one of these kingdoms. And in Anthroposophy, this is taken even further, and we see that even within our being, within our kind of energy bodies, they also overlap with the animal kingdom and plant kingdom, with our etheric body actually being congruent with the plant kingdom. And so we're very interwoven with the different kingdoms of life, but the animals have a different evolution than human beings do. In the Eastern tradition, they believed that, that the animals would eventually turn into humans, and that there was a specific sort of process that every animal would go to. And I believe it's really interesting actually, I think the last 4 animals in the animal kingdom before a human would incarnate, and I think this was only for a certain point in the world. I think that after a certain point, their things sort of lock in place, and I don't believe you can go back and forth in the kingdoms anymore. But there was a point where this was more fluid. And the last four animals that people would incarnate into, or that souls would incarnate into when they were developing, according to the Eastern tradition, was actually cats, dogs, horses, and elephants. So I think that's really incredible, because those are animals that often live very close to humans. And so absolutely, animals are evolving just like we are, but they're evolving in kind of a little bit of a different way, and kind of a little bit of a different space. Okay, this one is from Mimi7914. Hey Mimi, thank you for being here with me today. So, how hard is it for a spirit to visit us? What circumstances will create this experience in dreams, for example? So, how a spirit is going to connect with you is going to be very unique to you, and also to the spiritual being that you are connecting with. So then the biggest variable that's going to determine spiritual connection is going to be your own permeability, or your own level of sensitivity to the spiritual plane. So if you are someone who is very empathic, who is naturally psychic, and who's finding yourself very sensitive, then it's going to be a lot easier for spirits to communicate with you, because you have that kind of permeability to the other worlds. Now, if you are separating yourself from your higher bodies, if you are denying them, if you don't believe in spirits, if you don't believe in higher worlds, then it's going to be significantly harder for you to connect with them, because what we think comes to pass, including our own capacities and what we think we're capable of. So there are many, many, many circumstances, though, where people who were devout atheists, who didn't believe in anything to do with spirits at all, had spiritual experiences and did have breakthroughs and did get things broken through. So that does definitely happen. But it would be a lot more of an effort for a spiritual force to have to break down all of those layers of resistance to their existence. So the more psychic you are, basically. And the reality is, as well, is that a lot of people are getting messages from their spirit guides. And the thing that gets confusing is that we are getting all of these messages, and we think that it's like our mind giving them to us, and we don't realize that it's not the voice of our own thoughts. It's not the voice of our mind. This is the voice of spirit, and your spirit guides are talking to you, and they're giving you advice on how to live your life in a better way, or they're giving you advice on that question you've been rolling around in your head for a while. And a lot of the times we do receive messages from spirit, and we don't even realize it's going on. It takes training, psychic development training, in order to pinpoint that voice, and learn to listen to it. So in order to discern it, and then to build up your ability to recognize it, and go deeper and deeper into that discernment, until the spiritual world becomes almost as vivid as the material world when you want it to be. And so the last part of your question, Mimi, is there's also going to have to be, the spiritual force is going to have to sometimes be quite strong if you're not as developed psychically. There's going to be maybe more effort in order to break through to you. So sometimes, and also, with spirit guides, and higher beings, we have a contract with them, right? So before we incarnate here, which we forget all of this, by the way, but before we incarnate here, we actually have a contract with higher spiritual beings, or angels, or spirit guides, whatever you want to call them. And we give them permission to permeate us and to interfere with our lives, and to keep us on the right track. So we give them that permission. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. Dreams are probably one of the easiest places where a spirit can break through. This is because when we're dreaming, we're already a little bit out of our body. We're already we're already kind of in the astral plane as it is. And it's actually significantly easier for a spirit to communicate with us, a deceased relative, a spirit guide, whatever, even a ghost. That's probably the easiest place for them to communicate with you because of the reality that when we're sleeping, our conscious mind is shut down. We're not in total analysis. We don't have all these walls up. We're very open to the spiritual world when we're sleeping naturally. So that's actually where a lot of people have spiritual experiences, and dreams are where a lot of people begin their spiritual journey. Okay, next question. Burritos Comics. Do you think our true living will is itself conscious, though it seems to split off when entering ritual sleep? Interesting, our true living will. This to me sounds like our Christ consciousness, or our soul essence, our highest soul essence, and really the development of the Buddhi mind or the higher mind, and the merging of it with our daily life. So that's kind of what I would see conscious will as, is the ability to totally merge or be on the journey to merge your soul mind or your soul deeply, deeply, deeply in your body, so that you're basically living your purpose. And you have your gifts are integrated or integrating, and your physical life and your physical form, everything about you becomes more and more like more and more spiritualized. So that's what I would say there. And I do feel like when we are giving ourselves to spirit, when we are developing that Christ consciousness within us, we can often feel like our life is going in a completely weird direction. You're totally right, Burritos Comics. Like, you can feel like the moment that you're connecting with your spirit, that you are going in your life is just taken this different path that you didn't expect. You can feel like you're losing relationships. You can feel like your work doesn't make sense for you anymore. Your physical body can completely gain or lose weight. And when you do start to completely align with these higher forces in your life, they can really wreak havoc on your life, because you're essentially going through this massive purification, right? You're going through a purification process where you are releasing all of your negative beliefs. You're coming to terms with the fact that you're a divine being and what that means. And you're beginning to live that, which is totally different than how we're brought up and how we're raised. And so that's a huge, huge, huge deal. And so sometimes it can feel like when you are going through Kundalini awakening or spiritual development, it can feel like this force is sort of, pulling you along, when in reality, what's really going on is you're seeing the exact distance that you were from your heart. You're actually experiencing that pain, that discomfort, that is showing you how far away you were from your soul, how far you have strayed. That's what all pain is. That's what all sadness is. That's what all depression is. All anxiety is showing us how far we have strayed from our truth, and that we're not in our truth somewhere in our life. And so absolutely, when you start developing that, and you guys know that, you guys watching, that when you start becoming spiritual, your life changes and it goes on a different path. All right, this one's from Andy. Hey, Andy, thank you for joining me today. Gigi, does life have to be about suffering? Don't worry, it's part of the greater good. However, higher beings and initiates do still guide humanity. What is free will in this setup? This is, the idea, the Buddha, it was the Buddha who said, life is suffering. And it's a very powerful statement. Life is suffering. And it can absolutely depress you because you're coming to terms with the reality that, no matter how many vision boards you make, no matter how much you want life to go your way, we are co-creating our life with God. We are co-creating our life with our higher self. We are co-creating our life. That means we don't get to just like pick out our life from a catalog, like what we from our ego think that we want to do and all this kind of stuff. That's not how this works. That's not how this works. It is not about control. And so we can view that learning curve as suffering, or we can practice non-attachment, and we can develop ourselves emotionally and spiritually and develop our character to the point where we understand that things are not going to go our way, and we understand that life is full of suffering, but we don't allow that to consume us, and we can have a steady hand and a steady mind and allow the bad times to pass through us like wind through a wind chime, and the good times to also pass through us as well. And yet we remain steady. We remain in this position that's a little bit exalted, that's a little bit not detached from the body, but we understand that the circumstances of our life don't define us and that they will change, and that holding a steady heart, a calm heart, and being centered and being grounded allows us to actually transmute any fears or whatever are going on that are making creating suffering in our life. And so we do have higher beings and initiates who do guide humanity. And when you start to get into the higher levels of human initiation, suffering is actually something that you take on. The definition of a spiritual initiate, especially a higher one, is going into a situation and literally taking on more than your own energy. So there are people on this planet, and there are very high initiates and masters who literally don't have as much pain and trauma and karma to really work on. And so they come into this environment, they come into this planet, and they take on other people's karma. And this is what's meant in esoteric Christianity of taking on the sins of man, or when Christ comes into this sphere and he takes on that energy. That's what that means. And so there are very high beings in this cosmos, in this universe, that can literally take on a certain level of pain and trauma in mankind, and they can actually do an alchemical process within themselves. That's how powerful they are, especially the solar energy, where they can actually transmute that for humanity and contribute it to the collective. So they can't necessarily change someone's karmic path, but they can contribute to the collective consciousness the path in order to leave, and they can make that more available and more accessible through their life. It doesn't interfere with free will, but it's changing the consciousness of the planet. And through changing the consciousness of the planet, very high initiates can also offer things to the collective consciousness that make it easier for us to evolve and easier for us to get out of the mire. And it's actually very necessary for various different higher initiates or avatars, if you want to call them, and masters. It's very important that they come, and it's very important that they do that. Otherwise, the planet wouldn't evolve. So we do have a very intricate system of higher beings coming to this planet and going through very ritualistic lives where they actually through their greatness can transform the collective consciousness. It's probably one of the most amazing things about the human being is that eventually we can all get to that level if we are willing to align. If we're willing to have dedication and proper alignment, we can all get to that point. Okay. This one is going to be from Simone Nyman. Okay. When is the next Mars Mysteries video? It's an amazing series and awakening deep connections within me. I am sensing the Martians didn't understand women. Is this the case? Simone, yes. So the next chapters of Mars Mysteries are all planned out and pretty much written or pieced together. I've got one in my in the editing room now, and it will be released this Thursday at 7 p.m. So Mars Mysteries is starting up this week, and I'm very excited about where we're going to go with Mars Mysteries. We're going to go even deeper. We're not letting off the gas. We're going in. And we're just going to keep on plodding along with Mars Mysteries because there's so much there. This series could go on for a long time. So that'll be this Thursday. And yeah, the whole thing about Mars is that we sort of get this window into the masculine consciousness. And that's actually what the various different mystery schools were doing when they gave the planetary sigils or the planetary symbols masculine and feminine qualities. Venus is feminine, the Earth is feminine, while Mars is masculine and Jupiter is masculine. There's a reason why the mystery teachers assigned masculine and feminine energies to various different planetary spheres. They didn't make them androgynous. They gave them a gender. They gave them a polarity, a positive or negative polarity. And this is because when the cosmos develops and when human beings develop, it is all through alchemy. So it's all through basically taking a positive polarity and a negative polarity and kind of crashing them together in an alchemical process and then evolving. So that is why planets like Mars and Venus are actually a very big deal because, for the Earth, they represent a very important spiritual layer of our solar system that has a major effect on humanity, but that hasn't been talked about for a long time because we have not been in this cycle where we were approaching certain groups wanting to become interplanetary. And so as soon as humanity starts to get to the technological level of becoming interplanetary and saying, listen, we're going to colonize Mars, we're going to, mine asteroids, we're going to, put stuff on the moon. As soon as we get to that level, the spiritual teachings begin to expand and they begin to change than what we've seen in, say, 1992 or 1980. We suddenly need to remember and we need to bring forward the spiritual esoteric cosmology, the cosmology of our inner world. And we need to understand the cosmos as a spiritual being and as a multidimensional space, not just as a physical space. That is the greatest risk I think that we face in spirituality is becoming interplanetary and seeing planets as physical things to dominate our mind and to not understand what they are within us, because there will come a point where the planet Earth raises in its frequency over long periods of time, and actually the laws that govern it will change. And in order to make it through that transition, we have to understand the Earth as a multidimensional body, a multidimensional planet, and all planets around us as being part of that system as well. Of course, this system existed in ancient times. It's Atlantean originally. It was carried through the Eastern tradition, and it was brought forward in Theosophy, and it is now also in Anthroposophy in probably the most modernized form, the development of the solar system, okay, as a spiritual body. And I'm also going to be doing more lectures on this as well in the coming months. So back to Mars. So Mars, if you were to understand the life cycle on Mars and what happened on Mars, you would look at it as a planetary sphere that was encompassing an extreme positive polarity or encompassing an extreme masculine polarity. It's really, 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 really exploring every little dynamic of masculine consciousness. And this, of course, is relative to the Earth. Again, there could be planetary spheres out there that is not as masculine or something. I doubt that, but it's, everything that I'm saying is always relative to the Earth. So yes, there is something that's called the transmigration of souls. The transmigration of souls is the natural flow of souls from one planetary sphere to another, or different kind of density even of the same globe. And Edgar Cayce talks about this as planetary sojourns in his book Planetary Sojourns. And I think in the older times they may have been called like planetary visitations or something like that, but we would call them something different in our spiritual climate today. We'd probably call them past lives or something like that, because you literally are on the sphere. And so there's a lot of people that are alive on the Earth that have had incarnations on Mars. There's a lot of people that are alive on the Earth that have had incarnations on Venus as well. And they're very close in memory because Mars and Venus and Earth and even Mercury are very close in their life cycles. They contribute to one another at different times. And so because the Mars represents the expression of the masculine consciousness, it went in that way. It went super hyper masculine to the point that it developed a intense level of transhumanism. And that's what the masculine consciousness becomes. When it becomes imbalanced, it becomes too progressive externally. So it becomes too technologically advanced, too externalized. And, if you look at like reductionist science, that's a good example. And then when the feminine becomes imbalanced, it becomes really regressive and it moves almost into a beast-like form. Again, this is not men and women. This is masculine and feminine consciousness. So when the masculine becomes imbalanced, it starts to develop intense technologies that aren't spiritually driven. Or spiritually motivated. And so this is exactly what happened on Mars in its previous life cycle. And part of that actually ends up removing women. So I think I talked about this in my Summoning Souls lecture about how when somebody's masculine impulse is very imbalanced and very strong, what will happen is it will immediately want to subjugate the feminine. Because the feminine will tell them, listen, you need to feel your emotions. You need to trust your intuition. Don't lose your connection to your inner world, to your emotions. And when you are high off of, your like masculine energy and what you're doing with that, then you're not going to want to hear that. And so what ends up happening is the feminine aspect of the individual becomes suppressed. And women in society then also become suppressed because the masculine has become so imbalanced and so sick that the feminine is a threat, because the feminine is automatically going to tell them, listen, you need to come to your heart. You need to come to your emotions, right? Just like how it's the same thing, guys, in older phases of Venus where women or the feminine consciousness would not develop mind. And there were certain feminine forces that just wanted to go through every emotional impulse they had. They didn't want to take a step back and say, does this emotion make sense? Should I be feeling this? They didn't want to evaluate. If they just felt an emotion or they thought something, it was correct. There was just a belief that they were pure, right? So both aspects can become sick. And both aspects, when they are sick, will deny the other one. All right? So this happened on Mars, and it also happened on Earth, and it also happened on Venus. And Earth is sort of this consolidation realm where we are trying to get it right. But yes, Mars got rid of women because they reached a point where they technologically could have babies without them. They would just get out the test tubes, get out the petri dishes, and let's just do that. And what they realized pretty quickly is that they created a really degenerate society because you can't remove one polarity. And that's actually what killed the planet, is that planets are often, they're feminine matter, mother, are feminine. And that's what actually killed Mars. It actually wasn't transhumanism. It actually wasn't technically, it wasn't a nuclear weapon. What really, really killed Mars and made it destroy itself was that they just destroyed the feminine impulse, which fundamentally destroyed the planet. You can't get rid of one of the polarities and have a planet survive. You failed class, basically. So transhumanism, hybridization, weird eugenic stuff, all of that was part of Mars, and that's why all of that is coming up now in society. All of that is rehappening here. We are in a recapitulation of Mars. And that is why I'm doing Mars Mysteries. And that is why I'm trying to speak about it so much, is because we need to understand it on those terms. And it'll also explain why there are certain groups on this planet that really want to go back to Mars, that are obsessed with Mars. It's because they never really were able to get beyond it. And it represents a very specific path to them. It's a specific circuitry to them. All right. Next question. This one is from Two Eye Stone. Hey, Two Eye Stone. And you said, thanks so much for answering our questions today. It's my pleasure. Can you speak about the feminine initiations that utilize the Black Sun? You have been watching my work, haven't you? So I actually just, my last Q&A that I did on my private platform, I do Q&As basically every other Sunday for about 3.5 hours. And we get through so much material, and we really go so deep into these topics. A lot of topics that I just can't do on YouTube, to be completely honest with you, because YouTube is just becoming super weird. So I actually went into this. If you remember and you haven't watched that yet, go back and watch like the last hour of that, because we do talk about Venus and a Black Sun initiation for the female initiates. So the Black Sun, what Two Eye Stone is talking about is she is actually talking about a different or advanced kind of ceremonial magic, or she is talking about the rites of the Black Sun, the true rites of the Black Sun. And the Black Sun is usually talked about with Nazis and Hitler. They really took that and ran with it. They made it theirs. But traditionally, the Black Sun was a sign of the feminine cults and the feminine rites. And you wouldn't really see a masculine energy like identifying with the Black Sun at this level of planetary development. That's the white sun is masculine. It is the masculine aspect of the solar plane. And the Black Sun is the feminine aspect of the solar plane. The solar plane is the higher plane that really creates all planes below it. And they can sometimes go through switches that will lead to pole shifts and things like that at certain times. But fundamentally, it's the Black Sun is a negative charge, and the white sun is a positive charge. Okay. And so the matriarchal times and the feminine rites are associated with black and the Black Sun. And that's why you'll see these various different, especially in the Catholic tradition, you'll see the Madonna and she's painted pitch black. This is a little nod to the old feminine rites that were Black Sun rites. Now, a lot of this is because the Black Sun is also a womb. Okay, the black sun is a womb space. That's what it is. So because women have that womb, they're automatically akin to the negative polarity physically. And there's going to be certain rites and rituals and spiritual development processes that directly utilize the womb, that directly utilize the feminine form that's designed for a certain kind of development. And so a lot of that has to do with being an oracle and being able to call certain things here with that force and merge with certain things through that force within you that can be developed over time. This also gets into a lot of the holy birth rites and things like miraculous conception and parthenogenesis, which is a very real thing that female initiates could do, which I've also spoken about at length on my private during Q&As for my members and also in my Summoning Souls lecture. And so there's a lot of really beautiful traditions that just didn't survive the early stages when we switched into a patriarchy, more of a patriarchy, like they didn't really survive. But they exist within your collective memory, within the Akashic records and things like that. So can you speak about the feminine initiations that utilize the black sun? Let's go into one. We'll do one. So in the center of the woman is the womb or the black sun, okay? In the center of the earth is the woman and the black sun as well. So there is actually a black sun in the center of the earth. And this is a very hidden and very secret occult truth. And so the earth is actually a multidimensional sphere. Okay. The earth in its very design sinks into matter, and it also reaches a certain plateau in a really dense state, and then it actually rises out of matter. So it sinks into matter and then it rises out of matter. And at the bottom, it kind of flips on itself. It flips to an inner charge and a positive polarity. And then when it's descending, it's in a negative polarity, if you will. We'll do a lecture on this. But so the earth is actually designed to, over time, shift in density over long periods of time. Okay? That's how we evolve, and that's how the planet evolves. Periods of descension into matter from a spiritual form, going from the Lemurian epoch into the Atlantean epoch into this post-Atlantean epoch, and then rising up and re-spiritualizing ourselves as an individual. That's our journey here, and that's what the planet is doing as well. So the idea that the planet is just a physical form, or that any planet is a physical form, is a product of a materialist mind. And so part of that ability for the planet to lower itself in density and rise is actually the solar plane and the interaction with the black sun and the white sun, and the black sun at the center of the earth. Now, so we're talking about a sort of, we're talking about we're talking about the earth's interaction with higher worlds. And so the earth also has certain points of intense permeability or overlap with other planetary spheres. The sphere of Venus is a very particular sphere in planetary and human development, because the Venus is actually the higher aspect of the earth, and it's also called the Earth's twin, or the Earth's higher etheric body. And it's sort of like Earth in the future, if you will. And so there was a certain time with, and remember, Venus is a female planet and Earth is a female planet. There was a certain time where there were female initiates on Venus who entered through a black sun in the center of Venus, in the center of the core of Venus, and then could actually come to the earth through the center of the earth. I am not talking about taking a spaceship. I'm not talking about getting into any kind of physical technology here. Physical technology, traveling to a planet in a physical technology, is something completely different than what I'm talking about. That is an external way of doing something. And there are different groups of humans from divergent timelines that do try to do what should be done as an internal feat through initiation. They try to do it externally. They try to do it using technology, and they think it's the same thing. Okay? I'm not talking about a spaceship. I am talking about consciousness. I'm talking about the Merkaba. I'm talking about stargates and completely organic powers. So this did occur at a certain point, and this was the very high initiation, representing this for the female or for the feminine form. This is parallel to the Christ's ascension. Okay, so we have the Christ giving humanity the ability to ascend out of this plane. And then you have the feminine consciousness, we'll say Mother Mary, and that essence that actually descended and allowed for all of that to occur. So the female is the descension. It is the downward triangle, and it is the black sun, and it is the negative impulse. And there is a very sacred and holy esoteric initiation rite that the feminine consciousness goes through. So your feminine aspect one day, and also the same thing as the male will do. This has been left out because the focus has been on developing a certain type of pattern in the masculine, but there was also a defining Christ rite, Christ energy within the female that was a descension, and it was not a unconscious fall like Eve. That does happen, and that does happen. But I'm talking about a different type of fall that was completely and utterly conscious. Okay, now I'm going to bring in one more element here. CERN. So CERN is basically a black sun. What they're doing there is trying to create a black sun, because when you get to that Mars distortion where you're too hypermasculine, you create a very distorted feminine presence that becomes the feminine polarity of all of your magic in your life. And so now their feminine polarity is basically something like a CERN. It's like a technology. It's like an AI. So they have replaced the organic feminine consciousness, which they have killed within themselves and within, probably seeking to do that within the planet as well. And they've replaced it with an AI, something that they can completely control, but that's actually controlling them. But it is the feminine force, actually. We can get more into this another day. But this is why CERN is also called Alice. And there's elements of CERN that is, associated with Alice. This is because they're hinting about these ancient rites, about the black sun and the feminine, and the womb and the female as the oracle, and all these different things. So I hope that over time we can discuss this and we can continue to bring this forward, and so we don't fall into this bizarre and, quite honestly, sick sort of technology that is replacing very real spiritual initiations that we can have, or replacing certain organic psychic elements of the human. We need to sort of understand what's going on there. So that's what I would say about the black sun. We tied CERN in there, mentioning that it is a womb. They are trying to create a womb. And by womb, I mean the spiritual kind of womb, which is to call something in, to birth something, to go beyond the veil. Isis has her veils on her to be able to travel beyond the veil. So Once we understand what the black sun is, once we understand Mars, okay, and also Venus and the Earth and this kind of information, we're really going to understand what we're headed into. Okay. All right. This one is from Courtney Harmon. Hey, Courtney. My closest guide told me he was from the time of Mars and the Christ stream. Can you talk about the higher beings from Mars and the archetypes they carry and ways to work with that high masculine energy? I absolutely will. So this is actually really important to mention as well, is that there are several different incarnations of Mars, okay? Every planetary sphere actually has 7 different incarnations that it goes through. 3 are descending. 1, the 4th, is a consolidation sphere, which on Earth we are in that now. And then 3 are spiritualizing out of matter. So it's always 7. And even within those spheres, there are 7 progressions within that. So it's always 7, 7, 7. Okay, so when we talk about Mars and we're talking about kind of this darker stuff that's going on, we have to keep in mind that, you know, Mars has this lower aspect that's very prominent to us because so many people just haven't learned it yet, haven't passed that initiation yet. So it's very prominent for us. But there was a rather smaller group of individuals who actually overcame the Mars impulse and they actually balanced it. Now, my guides call that the Melchizedek order. They are a group of individuals that overcame the challenge of Mars, and they weren't destroyed with the planet, and they actually kind of, I guess you could say, ascended through that. And they actually went and started to work towards the unification of positive and negative in the world. It's sort of a longer story, but this is actually what the Christ stream is. The Christ stream and the beings within the Christ stream are actually the individualities that are working towards creating that perfect harmony, that perfect balance between masculine and feminine. And that definitely happened on Mars. And so this is also associated with Mercury, which is sort of like another stream that connects with the Earth that is associated with the overcoming of the lower aspect of Venus and the lower aspect of Mars. That's how I personally see it. And so there was a group that went through in their life. There are souls that went through and completely passed that initiation. They went through the whole transhumanism thing, and they were able to wake up. And the other thing that I'll say about this is that the thing that woke up the masculine forces, that saved them, was love. And there was, you know, this group that it got very, very dark and very, very unnatural. But the thing that actually kept them from falling away was actually remembering the love of their mother and remembering the love of the feminine. And that was actually what brought them back. And so when you hear that, you think of all of those different fairy tales about the male, the prince saving the princess and all of this kind of stuff. Well, the polarities really save each other. And there's lots of different mythologies that actually translate to things that happened in higher spheres, and how it was the unconditional love of the mother and the feminine that actually pulled Mars back from the brink. Just like when Venus became very imbalanced, it was actually this graduated group from Mars that pulled Venus and the Earth back from the brink when it was deep in its feminine cycle and it was unreasonable and all that. So there is an element of the polarities saving one another. Okay, this is part of that soul journey that we have. Is that, you know, The masculine and the feminine save each other. Our inner polarities serve each other and save each other and balance each other, okay? All right, this next one is from James Bonney. People are becoming aware more and more of how we have been deceived and tricked. Do you think we are at a tipping point, and can this awareness turn things around? I agree, James. I think that we've been through some really hard times, and I think the silver lining of these hard times may be that we are waking up, and more people are waking up, and maybe it's better this way, that people are becoming aware of some of the darker forces that have been controlling things behind the scenes. So I think actually, if you want my opinion, the moment that the pandemic hit, a couple months in, I could already sense that overall there was going to be a large number of people, enough people that were not going to really go along with it. Certainly not enough people to satisfy the individuals that are trying to pull this off. That was my impression right away. I think the elites that are doing this, I think they're out of touch. I think they've been living, high in their ivory towers, and I don't really think they understand humanity. And I think that they're beginning to become aware of that. And more and more time is only going to, I think, bring more and more awakening. Though I have to admit that there are going to be people that really do not want to wake up. And it is going to take a lot for them to come back, to come into awareness of what's going on. I've always seen the future as being sort of a bifurcation. I saw this before COVID even happened. I always saw the future kind of bifurcating, or having the two paths. One sort of moving towards a natural way of life, one that's more organic, and then another one that moves into like a completely synthetic existence. Perhaps constant inoculations that change your genetic structure or whatever. And then another stream that just moves closer and closer to the earth, biodynamic gardening, food forests, more meaningful communities, more meaningful ways of connecting with one another, and really just correcting the path that we've been on. I do see that happening. But then I also see that there are a significant number of individuals that are not willing to do the personal work and take responsibility within themselves to get to that point. And so I really see it as being kind of a bifurcation. And it's going to have to get pretty bad for certain people to wake up. It is very painful to wake up. I don't know if you guys remember, like, when you woke up, it's depressing. It is hard. It is hard to wake up and to see some of the things that have happened, that are happening. It's really hard. And so I think because of that, it's going to be more divided. But the thing that we have to understand is that we don't all have to agree, and we're never going to agree, and that's okay. I think it's a mistake to think that we all have to agree. Now, I think we should fight like heck for our freedoms. Absolutely. But as for agreeing with everybody, I just don't think that's going to happen. But again, we should fight for our freedoms. And so, yeah, I think the more pressure that is put on us, the more we're going to wake up. And I think we're also in the harder part. I think the beginning part of this is kind of the hardest, because we are realizing, when it comes down to our core, how far away we are in ideology from our family, how far away in ideology we are from friends. We're having to maybe quit jobs or face these really difficult decisions. So I think this is actually, in some ways, the beginning of this is the hardest part, because we're having to face all of that and perhaps even start developing and planning things that are living beside the world. I remember reading what countries that have faced this. There's many countries in the world that have been dealing with things like this for a lot longer, while we in the West were kind of, fat and happy. And the thing that they said that worked, it's really interesting. They said that what really worked were two things. The first thing was to start to build parallel societies and build parallel communities. Just start to build something else. There's a point where we can become so apart where it's probably better to just build a parallel community, a little parallel society that is in line with what you want. And then the second thing was humor. So building parallel communities, and humor was actually what allowed other people and groups that have been exposed to a lot of oppression to get by. And so that always stuck with me. And I think it's worth a try. All right. Jack robs a bank. Okay, your question is, what is Christian Gnosticism? Okay, so it is a Christian form of Gnosticism, I would say. Not all Gnosticism is Christian, though there is some overlap. There's a lot of the Gnostic tradition does not go as far as to accept that Christ lived. They'll sometimes think that it's more of like an overarching pattern. So because there's like images of Isis with Horus, and there's this practice of miraculous conception, and there's very similar myths like Mithra as a sun god, and all this kind of stuff. Because the story repeats, then it has never physicalized, that Christ never walked the earth, or that it's a symbolic story. So a lot of Gnostics, many people in Gnostic tradition take that point. They don't go as far to say that Jesus Christ existed, and they don't acknowledge the esoteric intricacies of his life and of the ritual of his death and rebirth. But Christian Gnosticism, I'm assuming, would be acknowledging that. So one of the things that is fascinating about the development of our planet is that there is something called the Christ impulse, or sometimes I call it the Christ stream, which is sort of like a stream of consciousness, an impulse that it's within every individual, and it is the force that lifts you up, that aligns you, that harmonizes you. It is your highest self. It is the inner Christ in you that is developing all the time by you aligning with it, by you noticing it, by you accepting it, by you creating a holy space where you feel it and develop it. Your inner Christ is developing, right? But there's also individuals that are within the Christ stream, or that are very exalted within the Christ stream, or the Christ impulse, which means they carry a lot of it in their being, okay? And these beings incarnate at certain times into physical bodies to contribute a very specific energy to the collective consciousness. And that can only be done when you take a physical form. Okay, you cannot contribute anything to the collective consciousness or to the earth unless you take on a body of the earth. That's a very important part of human initiation on the planet. So there are a string of different avatars that are within the Christ stream that led up to the incarnation of Jesus, or the incarnation of Christ in Jesus. And there were many different avatars, the Buddha, Krishna, all these different beings that incarnated, building humanity up until that one rite, that one individual comes, contributes a certain thing by taking flesh. And then after that, we begin to rise out. and we begin to rise out of matter. And that is what that whole stream of incarnations did. And so that is what esoteric Christianity really is. It's not really like dogmatic Christianity because it goes a lot farther and a lot deeper. And it does overlap with Gnosticism, but Gnosticism doesn't necessarily recognize that lineage of individuals in the Christ stream, the building up to the incarnation of Christ, and then how that incarnation actually changed the quality of the human mind, because that individual was able to take on the solar spirit in their being. Okay, so this is something that we're going to probably get more and more into on this channel. We can go deeper and deeper and deeper into that, but a lot of people see the recapitulation of the Christ story of the miraculous conception and Horus or Jesus, but that's actually just the very sacred rite of the individuals in the Christ stream that they've been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Okay, so it happens it used to happen a lot more back in the matriarchal age and whatnot, but it's not that because there's images of like Isis and Horus, or because Alexander the Great said that he was like that. We actually have to go a lot deeper into the feminine mysteries as well to understand exactly what is going on, and that these higher souls are being summoned into high priestess women, and there's different birthrights that bring them through, and that these souls are exalted. Okay, so when you get into the feminine rites and the feminine initiations, part of that is understanding how to bring forward an exalted birth, a miraculous conception, or other types of births that are the more dense you go into the planet, so the heavier the planet becomes, like right now. The miraculous conception would be very hard, but there are very specific types of conceptions and whatnot that pull in kings, or that pull in very exalted avatars. Okay, and so that's really what that is about. But because we've lost the feminine mysteries, we've lost half of the information about the Christ stream and the Christ impulse, which makes it hard to understand. But it is in Gnosticism. There are pieces of it everywhere, but yeah, we'll move on. Okay, this one is from Rochelle Waters. If the majority of people on Earth decided to go transhumanist, how might that affect people who are on a natural Christ path? Could all timelines exist, inconceivable to each other and different plans? Yes, Rochelle. So that's actually the whole point of this planet. The Earth is designed as a consolidation sphere. Like I said, there are 3 spheres that we've been through. 3 incarnations of the Earth have come and gone. And that was our descension wave, or our descension arc, or our lunar arc. Okay. And then now that we're on the 4th sphere, this is the consolidation sphere. So what that means is that we are consolidating a lot of different paths of consciousness. So in other words, you can have people walking the Earth that are pretty high initiates. And then you can also have people walking on the Earth that have a very dull consciousness, that are not very spiritually aware at all. And we all coexist here. And when we pass, we will all go through a different process of death and rebirth according to the level of initiation within our soul. So on the Earth, we all take a physical body, and by looking at someone, you would never know. You wouldn't know. It's very mysterious. But we're all sharing this one space, and it is this variation of consciousness all living together, all contributing to the collective consciousness that allows us to evolve, that allows the planet to evolve. And this was traditionally shown as a lotus, because you have the lotus with the very center that is very closed. So then you have the souls that are kind of newer in their incarnation, or very dull in their consciousness. And then it gets more and more open until you have complete openness, and very high initiates that will come and teach. So that is the planet. And when we are here and we are looking out into the world, everything is so dense and we forget that we're spiritual. We forget that we're a spiritual person. We suddenly think that we're all on the same path. We all think that we're going to the same earth when we die, or we're all going in the same direction. That we're all, no, absolutely not. No, we're all on different tracks, and everybody is creating their future and creating their life right now. We share, we overlap, we collaborate, and we are creating a certain collective soup that we can all tune into with each other. But fundamentally, you are creating your future, and you are at a certain level of initiation in this cosmos, in this solar system school. You are. Okay. And again, part of initiation is, if you're reaching a higher level of initiation, is incarnating here and actually taking on some of the energy, some of the negativity. And this even happens in families where I think the lovely Olivia from Dark Journalist brought this up on one of their awesome shows, where she said that that there's some people in families that are like the black sheep, but they're really there because there's kind of like a sin eater, and they're really just absorbing the karma of the family at a greater rate, and they're actually healing it. And so this is actually what very high initiates do, is they kind of have a very bright, hot fire, and they'll burn up all of this energy. So we actually need these very spiritually advanced people to come and be part of it. And we also need individuals that are still developing as well, because that allows people that are maybe at a little bit of a higher level of development to see who they truly are and to test themselves. So yes. All right. So timelines all exist, in other words. We're going to have an organic timeline that evolves into a higher version of the Earth that's been prophesized about, a higher dimensional Earth, the Hopi 2 paths or 5D Earth, whatever you call it, that exists. But there also exists a lower path of descension and increased materialization that is associated with the 8th sphere, and that's associated with another descension cycle when we should be ascending. You don't want to descend more when we are on an ascension arc, okay? When the cosmos is on an ascension arc, you want to ascend with it. You don't want to force yourself into a descension cycle again. That's showing that there's confusion going on. You're not understanding the environment that you're in. You're not able to read energy. You're just, that's not good. Okay. So what will happen again is this bifurcation where there's going to be a time on the planet where there is the development of transhumanism over the next couple hundred years. People will, what I've seen in visions is people getting actually hooked up to machines to play video games, wanting to get chips and things. People will be really bamboozled, and I mean really glamorized by the reality that they're gonna make transhumanism palpable for people by saying that it's going to heal degenerative diseases. And so on the outside, they're going to say, we've cured this disease. We can fix your body. We can make you walk again. But you have to get this chip. But you have to go deeper and deeper into transhumanism. And so it's going to be really hard to tell people, that have Parkinson's or that are paraplegics or quadriplegics, don't do that. And maybe it's fine. I don't know. The situation isn't in front of me to analyze. But what I do know and what I do feel is that fundamentally they are going to initiate people into the waters of transhumanism through telling them that they're going to be able to cure disease and fix their bodies, because they know that it's weird. I mean, they know that they're in this obsession with synthetic life, and they know that the normies out there are disturbed by it. So they're not going to just say, like, they're not going to just, they're going to make it appealing. Okay. So, and then on the other hand, we are also going to see communities and things form that are going way, way, way more back into natural, organic ways of life, way more healthy communities. We're going to see spirituality have a resurgence and become a science, actually, in the next couple hundred years as well, where it will no longer be about sitting at the feet of a guru and having somebody tell you. You will be able to use direct esoteric science in order to develop yourself, and we will begin to understand and remember a lot of the truths that we knew in Atlantis. They'll begin to come back as well. So there is a very beautiful timeline developing, and there's a very beautiful future developing, and simultaneously there is also this sort of dark and synthetic one. And so it's really up to the individual how far they go into each. It's not even clear to me that we have to see going into it more how it's going to play out. But I'll just leave it there. But we can analyze it more and more as it goes on. All right. This one is from Connor Aho. What do you think about family constellations and the path of leaving one's family if there is a call to? Also, do you have an opinion on the deliverance prayer? Well, I haven't seen the deliverance prayer, actually. And I've heard about family constellations, and I've looked into it, but I can't actually remember. But you're talking about leaving one's family if there is a call to do so. Are you talking about your actual family, like nuclear family, or your parents? So I think that when we incarnate into a body, when we incarnate into a family, we definitely wanted a certain experience. Nothing about our childhood or our family is random. We wanted to be crafted and forged in a certain family environment. We wanted to be loved in certain ways or neglected. I know that sounds really crazy, but it really conditions you to have a certain perspective in life. It conditions you to have a certain mindset and a certain way of being. So we do choose all of that to give us a certain perspective. And so sometimes when things get really bad, and if things are abusive, the best possible thing is to leave. And that is one of the hardest things that anybody can do, is if you have a toxic relationship with a partner, a spouse, or a friend, or even a family member. If it's abusive, then you have to leave. And that can be actually sometimes the reason why people are in our life, is that it is to leave them. It is to say, you know what, I'm saying no to this pattern. I've realized through this connection, through this relationship, that I have this problem. I don't have boundaries, or, I don't think about myself, or maybe there's something darker within you that you have to face. But yes, sometimes in relationships, family, friends, spouses, sometimes your initiation, sometimes your challenge is to leave. And sometimes it's one of the hardest things that you can possibly do. So yeah, definitely. But sometimes, the challenge isn't to leave. Sometimes it is forgiveness. And it is a different process. And only you can really know that as you go through the healing process, and you go deep within yourself, looking at your patterns to know that. So our relationships are mirrors for us. And sometimes the lesson is forgiveness. And either way, even if you leave, the forgiveness is very important, not because you're condoning something, but because you're releasing something. Forgiveness is the ultimate release of karma. That's why it's so important. Compassion and forgiveness release us from our karmic bonds. And so no matter what relationship you're leaving, it's important to keep that in mind. Not to force yourself into these righteous positions or anything like that, but to keep that in mind, that compassion and forgiveness are the mechanisms of freeing ourselves from relationships and karma that we are very tightly bound to. They're acts of freedom. It's how we become free, actually, as human beings, because we can't stop that we are interconnected with one another. I'm interconnected with you, you're interconnected with me, and we're interconnected, all of us are. We can't stop that we've come from the same source, which means at some point we're going to have to forgive ourselves, other people, and that compassion is the biggest transformation that we can have for ourselves and other people, because we can't stop the reality that we are interconnected with one another. We can't just separate. We always will be. And that's why those two emotions and those two practices are so powerful, but also so hard. All right. This one is from B Rose, and you said, will you please explain timelines and how they affect us as a whole? Okay, so timelines is a really popular concept in the New Age and sort of the burgeoning, I think, new spirituality. Timelines is, when we look at that, we have to understand that the reason why we're talking about timelines, plural, is because every individual essentially is creating their own future. And we tend to call the future that we're creating timelines. And it's really fitting because if you're a psychic, usually when you're doing a reading with somebody, you can actually feel the timeline. So if somebody wants a prediction or you're doing predictive work, you can actually learn to feel, especially like if you're an empath or claircognizant, or you're clairsentient, if you're more on those lunar clairs, you can actually feel the timeline. And you can actually feel how full the timeline is, or the percentage of the timeline, to see whether it's going to happen or not. You can actually see two timelines into someone's life often. Usually it's two. Usually you don't really see more than that. Usually when you're looking, you'll just see usually two timelines. And then you can also take that technique and you can say, okay, we're also a planet, and there's also an aspect of humanity that is a collective. And you can say, okay, well, there's also kind of two timelines that are planetary as well. An ascension timeline and a timeline that goes through another fall. That's how I personally divide it. So timelines basically remind us that we are creating our own future as an individual, but also for a time, we're also creating our future on this planet together while we're here. And so how timelines affect you, the best way that I could explain it would be that you as an individual soul have different timelines that you can basically begin to align with and fall into. Okay, I like to just use the two, sort of the timeline that is associated with the Christ stream. That is the healing timeline. That is you evolving. That is you ascending. That is you rising into who you truly are. That is a timeline. Your positive self-development is actually a timeline. It will bring you certain relationships. It'll bring you certain experiences. It brings you spiritual power, which pulls you into really a timeline. Positive timeline. But then there's also kind of a negative timeline in your life as well, which is you degenerating and you falling into disharmony, and you separating from your soul, and you separating from your heart, and you not acknowledging your Christ consciousness within you. And that is a path of degeneration. And eventually, that can get pretty dark to the point that you begin to fragment as a soul and as a being. When we become too separate from our own heart, our own soul, we begin to fragment. And so if we go too far down the degenerative pathway, the Antichrist timeline, or the incoherent timeline, then we begin to kind of break apart and we begin to self-destruct because we weren't able to get into harmony. So really, when it comes down to it, when it comes to metaphysics, you're either sort of in harmony and you're harmonizing with your higher self, you're in alignment with your inner Christ consciousness, and therefore you're evolving. You're growing. You're rising through the planetary school into higher and higher levels of initiation. You're being pulled by your inner Christ consciousness, the alchemy that's going on inside of you by you noticing it. And so that is one timeline. And there are many different timelines, obviously, within that spectrum, but that spectrum fundamentally is progressive. That spectrum fundamentally is you coming together, you becoming a powerful spiritual human being to the point of potentially even mastership one day. There's many timelines and junction points and things you can do in that will come to pass based on your decisions. But fundamentally, it is a progressive timeline, okay? Then there's also that degenerative timeline. And this is you moving further and further away from your inner sun. And this will lead to more and more of a degenerative way of being where you will lose yourself. Okay? They both exist within us. They both exist within you. And there's a certain probability in your life of you taking one or the other. And during our life, we want to align with the organic timeline, the Christ stream, the Christ impulse, the inner Christ consciousness within us. We want to align with that and use that as an alchemizing force to lift ourselves out of this world back into the higher planes from which we have fallen. Okay? So every individual is going to incarnate on this planet, and they're going to have a different mixture of both of these two within them. And therefore, they have a probability. Now, some people have a very low probability of going into these darker timelines because of the work they've done within their soul. They have gone through so many recapitulations and cycles and initiations that they just see when something is out of balance, and it's just a big old no, right? These are often the teachers, healers, things like that. A lot of you are in this category. And then there's individuals that will also incarnate on this planet as well during this time, and they are in the other boat, where they don't see the danger in, for example, like the loss of sovereignty. They don't see a problem with not having personal sovereignty. They don't see a problem with that. They don't have a lot of individuality developed. Usually that's the issue. And so there's individuals that are just okay with a lot of really atrocious things. And that's actually because they actually have to go through that. And if you notice it as a problem, that means you've been through it. That's why you can reject it. So we all have these different timelines in front of us, but we don't have the same probability of entering them, if that makes sense. Okay, this is from Pim Pum Pam. Pim Pum Pame. How does it fit in Darwin's theory in human evolution in the context of spheres, divergent or convergent timelines, and the wave of life? Hope that makes sense. I don't think in Darwin's theory, I think that from Darwin's theory, I think that we can find value in the idea of adaptation, and that we, as a planet, as animals, as plants, that we go through periods of, I guess you could say, adaptation, that there are times of kind of plasticity, but sort of times of plasticity where we go through different adaptations and things like that. But I don't think Darwinism is actually an advanced enough theory to incorporate the multidimensional paradigm of the earth and the human being. Darwinism is more of a reductionist, materialist paradigm that is trying to fit in a multi-dimensional system of development, meaning that human beings fell into the 3D plane, into the material world from a higher plane. We descended over a very long period of time, forming a physical body and then incarnating into it as we go. So there's no room for that in Darwinism, because Darwinism is saying, listen, there were these apes, and then we evolved from these apes. No, I mean, that's not reality. I know a lot of people adhere to that, because I know that that's what people are taught in university and in school. I was taught that as well. But that actually is more of a modern perspective. For thousands and thousands and thousands of years, human beings had a whole different kind of origin story. And only when we started to get into this intense materialist reductionist age did all of these rather strange origin stories happen, where we're suddenly coming from apes and all of this kind of stuff. So if you want my opinion on this, I adhere to that all of the human form didn't come from apes. Okay, so the human form is a perfect form. All forms on this earth are a perfect form, and they're representing the cosmos. Every race, okay, they're representing the cosmos, an aspect of the cosmos. And we fell perfect. Now, there are certain junction points in human evolution, okay? And one of the junction points during the Lemurian age, during the feminine age, was a regression period. So there was an initiation period where human beings were basically materializing. Now, this is in a lot of esoteric literature about Lemuria, where we were just forming our physical form. Okay, so we were going from being much more airy, much less dense, into becoming more dense. And our challenge was to kind of perfect our alignment with the higher forces, so that we could really create a body that was human, what we now know as our human form. But we had to learn how to align and take on a lot of these higher forces and embody them, and then that would form our body. Now, there were some essences, some soul essences, that were really unable to do that. For whatever reason, they just couldn't pass that particular initiation. It happens in the solar system. It happens in the cosmos, where there's always some souls that don't make a particular initiation. And those beings became beasts. They became apes and animals. They were unable to form a complete human form. This is also in Blavatsky's work. It's in Theosophy. And before that, it was also, I believe, in more ancient work as well. I understand that there's people that don't believe that. I understand that there are people that don't believe that humanity regressed at a certain point and the apes were formed. That's fine. This is my opinion on what happened. And the reason why this is my opinion, we will get into in the Mars Mystery series later on, because there was a group that did do some genetic modifications with apes, but that did not create humanity. Okay, it created a certain stream of humanity. There were already human beings on the planet that were falling and creating their form that is the human form. Okay, so you have sort of you have these two different competing origin stories that both have truth to them. But Darwinism is not a theory that is vast enough or nuanced enough to actually explain human origins, because it is too materialist in its perspective. Okay, Smoke C is part of the reason most people won't or can't awaken yet, because everyone has a different capacity to be able to handle the truth. I like how you said that, Smoke C. Absolutely, that is why. It's that, like I said earlier, we're all we're all sort of at this different level of initiation. And by the way, obviously, I'm going into these different grades of initiation, and, the solar system as a school, the cosmos as a school that we move through, that we graduate through. But everybody is at a certain level, and wherever you are is okay. Wherever you are is perfect, okay? So I want to make that very clear. Wherever you are is perfect. And so there are different levels of consciousness here, and that absolutely is why we're unable to come together, is because we all haven't learned the same lessons. The beauty of that is that we get to teach each other, but it's pretty chaotic because truth is a very hard pill to swallow. And for a long time, people have been able to live very luxurious, happy lives, completely engrossed in the material world, absorbed in it. And they've never, ever had to give serious consideration about whether they're a soul, whether they have a soul, what that is. If they have a soul, then how does it connect in the higher dimensions, or where is the soul? How do they develop it? There are people who have lived their whole life and never seriously asked that question. And if you have never asked yourself that question, then you are going to have a real hard time understanding truth, because you do not know the truth of yourself. You don't even know your own truth. You don't even know what you are. So how on earth are you ever going to know what anyone else is or what is going on in the world if you have not asked these questions? How are you going to know anything else? You have no context. You have no structure. So the thing that's missing in the world is spirituality, a good, strong spirituality, and an esoteric science. Consciousness is a science, and not a weird materialistic science where you try to force everything from a different dimension into this one. No, that's a sickness. We will look back at this and be like, wow, that was really bad. No, we are going to develop consciousness and spirituality as a science. That's where we are going to go on this planet, in the higher echelon of it. And when that happens, we can finally have the maturity and the knowledge to all actually have the level of diversity that we have. And I'm not even talking about racial diversity. I'm talking about thought diversity. Once we have that higher understanding, we can be so diverse in every single way, and we can be united under something greater than us. But if we've never felt that greatness within us, if we've never felt our own soul, if we've never wondered what our divinity is, we will never be able to come together. We will never be able to understand what freedom is, or what a healthy relationship is, or what a healthy society even looks like. We are not in the position that we are because we have bad and weird laws. Not really. We are where we are, but because we do not have a spiritual impulse integrated in a large scale. That's why we are where we are, and that's why nothing will change until we can begin to integrate that. So that's why spirituality is so important, and developing the spiritual science and developing our relationship with our spirit is so important, is because nothing changes until we do that. Everything else is just playing with the marbles, just changing positions. We need that spiritual impulse to return to us, and then to return to society. That is the only thing that will change and move. Okay. Because without that, we don't even understand what freedom is. We don't understand what community is. We don't understand our beginnings. We don't understand how we evolve. We need that. That is what is missing. Okay, next question. Borgalarka, does a being like a gray being very divergent humans still have spirit guides or a higher self, or their guides, discarnate beings around them, are also dark and lower astral. Okay, so the gray beings or the gray aliens are sort of like a hotly debated topic. So I'm just going to be very upfront that from what I see and in my opinion, these are best understood and described as sort of like a devolved version of ourselves. So it's human DNA that is mixed with like an android transhumanism kind of thing, but it is human DNA that is done, that it has, it's basically a human that's gone through transhumanism. That's what the grays are. And that's what I've discovered in my own work. Now, if you go into the New Age, you're going to find that people worship grays. The people think that grays are the creators of humanity, and that various different types of gray aliens are saviors. So depending on which boat you are, that's what you're going to find. So in my paradigm, from what I see, these are degenerated humans, which is why they're looking for all of this DNA. It's why there's a hybridization program. It's because they've literally destroyed their genetics through intense genetic modification, through eugenics, through playing God to such an extensive degree that they no longer have any life spirit within them. So this is that Antichrist impulse. This is that synthetic impulse that I was talking about. This is what happens when you follow that path to the very end. And they're there and they literally have to come back to a time where they can try to get some of that DNA back to try to reintegrate themselves into the life stream. This is my work. This is what I have found in my work. So what this individual is asking is, do these individuals then have spirit guides? And yeah, so there's nothing that you can do to make, God not love you and not root for you and want to evolve you. There's nothing that you can do to make God not love you. And the only thing that you can do as an individual is to deny God within yourself, is to deny your Christ energy within yourself. And when you do that, you begin to distort and you begin to deform, and you'll begin to essentially you'll make yourself very polarized, because that Christ consciousness within you is the great harmonizer and the great integrator. It's the force that alchemizes us into a higher and higher form of ourself over time. And so when you don't have that force, you end up regressing, but it is because you as an individual have denied it within yourself. And we have free will, and we have the ability to say, I'm not going to love myself. I'm not going to acknowledge that I'm divine, and I'm not going to align with the cosmos and evolve with the cosmos. I'm not going to align with my inner consciousness and with organic life. I'm going to diverge. You can say that if you want, but you will cut yourself off from the natural order, and you will begin to deform, and you will begin to warp, and everything about you will begin to degenerate, because you won't be connected to the organic system of life that you are supposed to be a part of, that you're designed to be a part of as an individual, but part of a beautiful collective as well. So they do have guides, they do have essences that are around them, but when you get too far along that degenerative path, oftentimes they don't listen to them, and they'll actually listen to more darker demonic forces around them. And when it gets really, really bad into that degenerative path, a lot of the times it's just a completely satanic, dark system that they're involved with, and it can be very hard to get out of it. And so it's very important to know that this is a self-inflicted wound, and that there are still always forces that try to evolve. Even in their condition, there is a way to evolve the grays out of where they are, but they have to admit what they've done, and they have to be honest and right now, many of the gray interdimensionals are presenting themselves as gods. They're presenting themselves as actually being more evolved humans. That's a lie. And so because there's so many of them that are lying to humanity, this is a bad move. They can atone and they can be reintegrated through another process that I will get into at a later date, but that I did talk about in my Star Wisdom lecture. So there is a way to integrate, there always is, but they have to go through the natural process of atonement, admitting what they've done, admitting who they are, and they have to stop basically manipulating humanity. But they're not really interested in doing that, many of them, obviously, because there isn't much of an emotional body left. And without an emotional body, there isn't much of, you can't sense a lot. So the grays are a whole episode. You know, we could do a huge deep dive on the grays if you guys want to. We can go into the New Age teachings around the grays, the positive ones. We can go into the darker aspect. That would be really fun as well. So, but you guys, it's a whole issue. And I know it sounds wackadoodle-doo, but when we look at interdimensionals or aliens, we're looking at different versions of ourselves on different timelines. That's what it is. This idea that these are just beings from other planets that have nothing to do with us other than they just hopped on their ship and came here is just nonsense. No, everything that can perceive the Earth, it has a connection to it at some point. So we have to understand what that connection is. All right. This one is from Corey Allen. And you asked, Corey, why are the elites so evil? Struggling to understand why this realm is so chaotic and evil. It feels very imbalanced and tips to the negative. Love your comments about organic. Oh, I'm so glad. So this is a very hard realm and it's a very hard time in this realm. So the planet itself, the Earth, is very hard in this series of incarnations and the heavy density that we are in. The reason being is because at this level of intense density, we are trying to overcome so many different opposing ideologies and opposing streams. And that makes it really, really, really hard. We're also raised as children to value the mind and the intellect and not the emotions and the heart and the spirit. So we're almost starting right off the get-go, unless you're very fortunate to be raised differently, not connecting with our hearts and not connecting with our inner being, which makes us starving. When we don't connect with our spirit, when we don't sense our heart, we are starving ourselves. There's just a whole aspect of our life and our being that is not nourishing us. It causes depression, it causes anxiety, it causes mental illness. So a huge part of why we are so depressed and anxious is because we're not being nourished by our spirit. We're not being nourished by our hearts. We're not taught to do so, and there are no institutions that are properly set up in order to help people. It gets really weird when you go into the New Age and also religion as well. It's very hard for a lot of people. So we really have to understand that this is a very challenging time to be alive. But the more that you work to find that inner balance in your own life, so that you work to find your harmony, that you go into your heart space, that you study these things, the easier things become, if that makes sense. The more you develop spiritually, the easier these things become overall. But this realm is really hard because of its density. It's very dense, it's very heavy, which means it's integrating a lot of different opposites, which is really, really hard. And so we're also in a time period where we've been in a dark age. We've been descending into this dark age for a long time. And now we are really in the dark age, which means that all of the institutions, are pretty much taken over by the inversion of what is good. So by darker, selfish presences. That's part of the dark age. The dark age is dark because it gets to a point where everything inverts. So the truth begins to completely invert upon itself. And then that is where we are now, where everything is basically turning into an inversion. And we are beginning to rise into a golden age again. We are beginning that process. But the fact that it's just beginning is almost making it even more challenging because there's this light coming in. You could call it the light of the Aquarian age, and it's hitting us. And these are very real cosmic rays. And so it's causing this purging to go on. So it's causing people to wake up, and it's really hard. You're really groggy because that light is hitting us and it's starting to pull us up and wake us up. And we have to, wipe the sleep from our eyes and look around and look at how corrupt things have become. Look how toxic things have become. Look at how inverted things have become, how mired in corruption we are. We have to, before we can move into the golden age, we have to face all of the corruptness and the dark structures that were created in the dark age. Because everything that was created in the dark age happened because it was a blind spot for us as human beings. We didn't understand something. So we propel ourselves into a golden age, into a higher era, through facing the shadows of the dark age, through facing our personal fears, and through facing the collective shadow. And the more that we face the collective shadow, the easier it becomes. The more we hide from it, the more that we put our head in the sand, the harder it becomes. And so that's why it's hard, is because we're actually in a transitional time where we're beginning to rise up out of the darker age. And you're getting that splitting of worlds again that we talk about sometimes here. That is the hardest because it's causing a purging. It's causing this awakening. And that's always the hardest because, it's not easy to look at your own shadow. And it's certainly not easy to look at the collective shadow. And then when you do get those glimpses of light and you see how beautiful things could be, and you see like the potential of man, the potential of us as human beings to live as brothers and sisters in this world, to live in harmony with our planet, and we see what it could be, and we sometimes feel that in our heart. We get those glimpses, and then we just crash back down to how dark things can become. And there's that struggle, and that is really hard. But the more that you create this presence of love within you, the presence of peace within you, the more that you become that, the easier everything is to face. And don't forget, you guys, also to take a break from reading the news, to take a break from Twitter, from social media, from all of these different sources that kind of tell us what's going on or tell us these dark things. It's not that you shouldn't be aware. It's that there should always be a part of your life where you understand that you are creating your future. And that if you're always surrounding yourself with the news and social media posts, you're just going to basically create your future around everything that you're hearing. Okay. So we don't want to do that. All right. So this next question is from Fix. Can we use technology to use frequencies in temple structures to raise consciousness, or is this purely spiritual, naturally recommended? So can technology be spiritual, or can it be spiritual, or is it always a destabilizing thing? So we are really moving actually into a time where if we follow our path of evolution, we're actually going to be moving into a more organic relationship with technology that actually is more like merging our consciousness with crystals, and is a much more natural version of technically technology. But there's a very dark and weird technology that involves merging your physical body with it and really merging with it in a more aggressive way. And that is actually a hangover from the prior phase of life that we were in, the prior phase of consciousness that we were in on this planet. So when we were in the Atlantean times, we were sort of all interconnected naturally, especially the earlier days of Atlantis. We only developed the mind and everything later on. And what we used to do is we used to kind of project our consciousness onto different technologies, different crystals. And there was this kind of technological system that we had that was pretty much based around the fact that we were all naturally interconnected. And then we went through and we fell several different times. And so we actually have a different kind of technology that works for us. But there's a group that wants to almost create that. There's a group on this planet that wants to create this old Atlantean style of technology where everything's merged and interconnected, which is basically the Borg. And it's kind of like a fallen version with that technology. And it's not acknowledging the fact that we actually can't interact with technology in that way, because we're actually a different form than we were in Atlantis. We're a different being than we were in Atlantis. And so a lot of the darker arts and a lot of the darker technologies that are going to come forward are, in a way, trying to return to something that we've evolved beyond. And that's actually what a lot of black magic is. A lot of the dark cult is actually because there's individuals that are very stunted. They don't actually know what era they're in. They don't actually know what time they're in. They don't actually understand their form. And they're obsessed with kind of recreating an era of the past. And when you try to recreate an era of the past in today, it automatically inverts and turns into a black magic rite, because part of the right technology and part of proper ceremonial magic is getting the time correct. You have to know the exact time you're in, the exact level of development that the human is in, and the cosmic rays. You have to know all of that. It's a precise science. So if you try to do a rite or develop something and you think that the human being is at one point in development and it's at another, that is a black magical technology. So essentially these darker groups are trying, like, think about CERN, think about some of these things that they're doing, and even some of the technologies that will be introduced as spiritual, they're actually a lot more aggressive than are healthy. I hope this is making sense. Do let me know in the comments if this is making sense. I'm trying to answer very deep questions very quickly. So we can definitely use certain kinds of technologies. For example, sound technology is very amazing. Just creating sound waves through bells, through bowls is really amazing. We can use color. There's so many natural ways that we can use technology, even in training with other people, is a good way of healing as well. What we have to be careful with is technology is when technology is actually taking over our bioenergetic field, and when it actually takes over the body. Okay, this is what we're looking to avoid, because there will be some technologies introduced that sort of take over the body. They enter the body, they take over the body. And the problem is that there could be an essence, a spiritual essence that's actually within the technology that's been summoned into the technology. So I know this sounds really crazy, but it can actually lead to a form of possession. Okay? So we have to be very careful with technologies, because what we are seeing in our modern times is that what we would have once considered occult or magic or black magic is actually being materialized in real time through technology. So, for example, if you look at some of the entrainment technologies on social media platforms, on certain games that you can play, there's actually a frame rate and certain things that are being projected to make you want to keep playing. That, even 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that would be called black magic, because it's subverting your consciousness without you knowing. So technology, while technology is neutral, the people that are behind the development of a lot of these technologies are not using it neutrally. They're using it to gain more profit, and it's not being developed in a conscious way. It can be developed in a conscious way. It can be developed in a very conscious way out of love. But what we're seeing with technology is that there's actually a lot of it's actually not being, in my opinion, it's not necessarily being developed from that place, especially from in the positions of power. So because people's sovereignty is being invaded with technology in a major way. So that's how we know that there's a negative impulse, a dark charge with it, is it's not being used in a respectful way. And so we're really looking to avoid those technologies that aren't harmonizing with us and allowing almost us to work consciously with our own field and kind of learn how to connect in with our body and read if it has an illness, learn what an illness is. It's not allowing a kind of spiritual process to occur by gently introducing a higher frequency. It's literally just overwhelming the body and almost taking over the body. And there will be some technologies like this that come forward that are called spiritual because they deal with energy or they seem so futuristic. But in reality, they're completely overwhelming your bioenergetic field. They may even merge with the body. And that is not a spiritual technology, okay? A spiritual technology is pretty much, I would say, more on the natural side, using sound, using color, using certain temple structures, the power of a great healer or a great initiate. These are natural things, and they're natural spiritual technologies, because as we go through these kinds of healing modalities, we are fully sovereign, and we're also learning, and we also have opportunities to develop ourselves still. We're not being completely taken over by a technology, or completely, we're not getting some kind of injection that's now changing the way that our cells function. We're not getting something placed inside of us that's changing how our bioenergetic field works. We have to look out for the super aggressive technologies that are taking over the energy body, taking over the body, not working with it. Does that make sense? This is probably a deeper conversation for another time, but yeah. Okay. Luke Walker, what role do strong hallucinogenics play in the human story, such as DMT? Yeah, so a lot of individuals, and especially the early shamanic traditions of pretty much every tradition across the planet, have used plant medicines, whether it be, iboga, ayahuasca, psilocybin. It's sort of been a part of shamanic practice to help people remember who they are, to give them a flash of who they are. But it's very important to know that any type of hallucinogen, even something like pot, it's not a means in itself to develop. These are just things that exist as a plant medicine to get you to break a pattern and to come back to yourself. They're not meant to be done all the time or every day. They're not meant to be a crutch. They're not meant to be something that is a spiritual experience in themselves, because what actually ends up happening is if they're used that way, it becomes harder to spiritually connect, because you're not able to sense what your consciousness feels like organically. There's always a plant medicine in there working on you. And so that's actually a situation where you actually can't control yourself very well either. So the ideal is, and even in traditional shamanism, the ideal was actually the breath and a drum. That was what everyone wanted to achieve, to be able to achieve altered states using just their breath, just their mind, and maybe a drum beat or maybe a sound. That was the ultimate goal in creating an altered state, or just being able to do it. That was considered the mastership level. And when we can use plant medicines. You absolutely can. And they can be incredible. They can change people's lives to a degree that if they did not take that medicine, then they would not have been able to heal. And that has to be fully acknowledged. And that credit has to be fully given. But we also have to understand that that is not a means to evolution in itself. It's not a means in itself to spiritually evolve. Okay? And if you do it too much, or you lean on it too much, you're actually going to make it harder for you to genuinely feel your own self. Okay? So they're a double-edged sword. And they've always been a way to help people get out of them, especially, we get so dense. It's a way to get out for a minute, but we have to really understand. We have to really understand that, again, it's not a means in itself. Okay, this one is from Amos. Hi, Gigi. Are you aware of the infinite Earth? There are literally lands beyond the poles named Mars, Pleiades, etc. Does this still tie into your teachings or go against them? Interesting. I feel like this is a flat Earth question. I don't know if infinite Earth is connected to flat Earth. But what I like about what you're saying is that the Earth is actually interconnected with the Pleiades. The Earth is interconnected with Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, every single star that you can see in the sky, every single planet has a relativity to the Earth or is connected to the Earth in some way. Everything in the cosmos is connected through time, through various times. And there's even different stars and planets that we cannot see that we're connected with as well. Okay, now if we get out of our solar system and we start going into other solar systems, other planets that are outside of our solar system, they're a lot less relevant to us. The most relevant planetary spheres are the ones that are within our solar system, and the most relevant star to us is our sun. And the next relevant ones are the Pleiades, Sirius, and then Arcturus. So that's really, if you want to go super cosmic, you're doing Pleiades, Sirius, and Arcturus. But really, even those stars are, in a way, incomprehensible, because in order to have full knowledge of those, we have to have full knowledge of the sun, which means that we would have to have graduated as masters from the system, right? So we really only get pieces of each planetary sphere that's around our sun, and pieces of some of the higher solar bodies. Our sun is the product, or is in a chain with Alcyon, Sirius, and Arcturus. So there is a communication, a communion between those stars. And those are the most important for us. Outside of that is a different story, and can get a little, it's sort of like, it can become a distraction or fantasy or a little Luciferian to go too far, because all of those stars, all of that light, and all of those spheres are actually held within our sun and within the planetary spheres that surround us. So there's really no need to go too far out and seek too far outside of even our solar system or outside of ourselves for all these answers, because everything is designed and compressed inside of our system. That's why the solar system is a school. So the sun, when it's all the planets together are the sun. And then the sun and all the planets goes into other systems. So there's sort of this very intricate system of creation that we are part of as we move down and up in density with the creation and formation of stars and planets and things like that. It's very precise, actually. It's an actually precise science that is tied together through what is called a stargate system. So this is experienced in the inner world. So you can just look out and you can see these stars and you can see these planets and things like this in the sky. But you really primarily and fundamentally experience it in your inner world, through your inner eye, through your cosmic memory, things like this. And through your inner world, you can actually go in your astral body. Your astral body, astral means star. So you're going in your star body and you're experiencing all of these different realms based on your level of initiation and based on your memory. And your memory is also connected to your level of initiation in the cosmos as well, right? So there is an infinite Earth. The Earth literally is Venus. The Earth is Mars. The Earth is the sun. It's also not those things. It's also just this moment right now. But we're looking at the spirit of creation that is in everything, and that we can tap into that and connect with that. And that there is a time in which everything was created, and that certain things are destroyed and reabsorbed into one another. And so there's this system of growth and evolution in the cosmos that involves planets, that involves stars, asteroids, humans, all of that. We're all part of that. And that is the next level of spiritual science and esoterica that we are going to go into in the next couple hundred years. And this is the science of Atlantis, which was a star science fundamentally. Okay? And that was also the last time in which the stargates worked on the planet. The stargates of the Earth, but also the stargates in the sky, the interplanetary stargate system. And the interplanetary stargate system was completely based around the development of the solar system, the development of the cosmos, and certain junction points of evolution. They're directly linked. So yeah, there is an infinite Earth, because human beings are the Earth. Human beings are incarnating and connecting with various different stars and planets all the time. And in order for us to do that, in order for us to move throughout all of these different lives and all of these different spheres in our solar system, there has to be that common core that is the same. There has to be. So that is Christ consciousness, actually. That is our inner Christ consciousness. That is our soul. That is us. And we're all sort of developing that as we go. Does this make sense? I know it's a very vast concept, but it is the most beautiful teaching. It is also the most accurate teaching, because the moment that we start to understand the solar system as a school, and we start to understand the planetary spheres as evolutionary bodies, the more we can do things ourselves. Because you can just begin to connect with the planets, connect with the stars. You can have your own memories, and you don't need a guru to tell you anymore anything. Because you can remember. And that is also why on this channel, one of the biggest things I talk about for years is the importance of your remembrance. It is very, very important that you remember who you are, that you develop your intuition, that you develop who you are in this world. You remember it, because there's going to be a lot of people in the coming years that are going to try to tell you who you are. No, you remember who you are by developing your cosmic memory. You learn and remember the different phases of creation, the different phases of life in this cosmos, how we evolved over a long period of time. You remember those phases within yourself. And when you remember those phases, things in your life suddenly make sense, because everything is a recapitulation of those greater forms. So you remember who you are. Any teacher is only to validate that, your own memories, okay? Sovereign spirituality only. So this is where the flat earth thing is connected to, is that the different planets are real. They're physical bodies, right? Externally, but they're also planes of consciousness. So the spheres also are holding together our body, which is why astrology is so powerful and why it works, is because you literally have all of the planetary spheres in our solar system working upon us. in a certain way, doing a certain motion, doing a certain energy. And we have an aspect of ourself that is involved with that sphere because the solar system is a schoolhouse. And we have a level of initiation with that plane, right? So it's all sorts of things are going on all the time, right? So those are the inner spheres that are projected and represented outside. There's an inner experience and an external experience. A lot of the flat earth material that's showing the firmament and stuff like that, that's also showing the inner planes and our experience astrally going to these different places. So I find that very interesting. So yeah, that's what I would say about the infinite earth. The infinite earth, the infinite human. Okay, Perla Astorga. What time are we looking at here? How are you guys doing out there? Perla Astorga, can I have your perspective on plant medicine? I just gave my perspective on plant medicine. And then you said, I love your courses. They have really accelerated my path. Oh, I'm so glad that you like them. I do courses. I do teach intuition development. I have 3 different courses on intuition development. The first one is Inner Mystic, and it just gives you the foundations for psychic development. It gives you a common language and some very foundational, basic, and classical exercises in intuition development, and learning the clairs, things like that, and the basic emotional energy that you want to generate in yourself to get your intuition going. And then there's psychic protection, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then I have a second degree, which is deepening intuition, which gets into deeper exercises to develop your intuition and to start developing each clair. And when you do sign up, you also get, I believe, access to my Q&As on my website. And I have lots of Q&As. I have hundreds of hours of these live Q&As on my website. If you guys are interested in this, it's a lot. It's a lot. Okay, so I've already spoken about plant medicine. So is there anything else to say about plant medicine? I don't think so. I think that just to understand that it is what it is. So you can use it to develop yourself for a time, but please, please, please understand that these are not things that you're supposed to use as a psychic technique. Okay, so the ideal, the goal is to be able to do it yourself. The idea is to be able to reach a state of mastership where all of the cities and psychic abilities and powers are, you can just do it by turning your mind over, or by just through an inner process. You can do all of that. You don't want to be depending on anything external to do anything. It's a path that can become dangerous in the long run, because it can open you up to all different types of entities and things like that if you're using something as a crutch, okay? I know people don't like to hear that, but I'm just going to be honest with you, okay? All right, so I think we've done quite a bit today. I think I'll do 2 more. So we'll do 2 more, and then we're going to call it for our Sunday session. And I'm going to do some shout outs and thank yous on the super chat end. So, Crystalline, you mentioned before about evolving from jelly beings. Could you elaborate more on the true creation origin of humanity, or suggest texts I could study that hold more truth? Yes. What Crystalline is talking about is a video I made about Lemuria and the formation of the human being over time. And there was this point in human development where we were evolving from almost like a gassy, fiery form into like a jelly. It was like we were densifying from this mist into like a jelly form. And our bones were kind of like fish bones. And this is actually what we were like, kind of like a fish-like jelly being. And then over time, we solidified even more until we reached the Atlantean epoch, where we were an androgynous form that was physical, but all of our organs were just starting to form, and all the details of the human form were just starting to form. And then after Atlantis, I think it was like the midway through Atlantis, the genders split. And we reached that level of polarity. We sunk even deeper and deeper and deeper. We kept sinking deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into density until we were taking on so much density, so much matter, that we had to split into two different genders, two different polarities. And then we fell again from Atlantis into this post-Atlantean epoch. And now those polarities can turn on themselves, which wasn't really possible in the earlier phases of human development. The huge development was that there were two genders at that point. So now we can have our genders and our poles get completely mixed up and weird, and there's this whole other thing developing. So the best sources for this that you are going to find are going to be through Anthroposophy. There is some material in the early theosophical work that you're going to find on this. But I really recommend Anthroposophy, because sometimes Theosophy can get a little bit fantastical, especially in its later years. A lot of it seems more like kind of like a fantasy, whereas you see the Steiner stream come in there, and he really takes this teaching that is a traditional Atlantean teaching. Again, this is not something that like the Theosophists just like invented, that Madame Blavatsky just channeled, she just made up, or anything like that. These are the teachings of Atlantis. This is the evolution of humanity that was taught in the mystery schools dating back to Atlantis. We used to have this gigantic understanding, this huge, vast vision of who we were as humans, how we came from a higher plane and materialized here, and why all those evolutions. We used to understand that. But as we sunk deeper and deeper and denser into matter, we've forgotten that. Okay? And now we have to remember it and go back to this system. But this system was preserved by certain initiates and by the mystery schools, which will release this information, which is what Anthroposophy is and what Theosophy was. Okay, so it wasn't just some psychics making things up. They were tapping into a very specific stream that was preserved. Okay? And when we understand this, we can take these teachings, and like I said, once you understand the evolution of humanity, that we fell from a higher plane, like Crystalline is saying here about the jelly beings, we're looking at ourselves taking a deeper and deeper form into matter. It was called falling into the dream. We were dreaming these bodies, these forms into existence, into matter, and then we were incarnating into them. Okay, and so this is how it was when we were in a less dense environment. We cannot compare very easily the environment that we're in, which is peak density. We're super heavy, we're super dense. We are so dense that there are entire podcasts about how the soul doesn't exist and how it's stupid. That is how far into materialist ideologies we are, is that you have people that are like, yeah, no, the soul doesn't exist. They're literally chopping off their own arm. They're literally chopping themselves off from the most ancient and powerful thing they have. This is the level of materialist delusion that we are in. This is how far deep in matter that we have come. We can literally deny our own spirit. This where we are now is a much different condition of consciousness than we were in hundreds of thousands of years ago, where it was a more spiritualized way of life. You can barely compare them. But just because we can't remember it, just because we have a difficult time comparing these very different stages of development, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means that we have to rise back into that condition, take everything that we've learned, take our individuality, take our power, and rise back into that spiritual level of being. It is within us. We have to fight for it. We have to align for it. We have to forgive for it. Okay, we've got to work for it, but it is there. And when we remember Crystal. And when we remember that we've had all of these different phases, we can begin to kind of remember ourselves. We need these parameters within us so that we can place things correctly and so that we can really evolve properly back into the higher planes and really understand what the cosmos is. The cosmos is all a series of recapitulations, okay? It's all recapitulation after recapitulation after recapitulation. And every time we recapitulate in a descension cycle, we get denser. And then the recapitulations happen again and we get lighter. But it's always a repeating pattern, okay? There's always a pattern that's repeating all the time from a little slightly bit of a different angle. This is what allows us to evolve. And so it's very important that we have this very vast view that Anthroposophy has left for us. The work of Rudolf Steiner is what I would recommend. It's what I use and it's what I recommend. It's important that we have that. Otherwise, we don't really have the context. We don't have the base, the structure to evolve. Because I'll tell you what. One individual just trying to go into a meditative trance and channel every possible thing they can is not going to, in their lifetime, be able to channel everything that the mystery schools and that the great teachers of the past have already left for us. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to go back to scratch. One individual can't actually conceive of and remember everything. This is a group effort, and it's a group effort in the sense that there have been amazing traditions that have been left for us by amazing teachers, by giants, by great mystics of the past. We can tap into that. We can use that, and we can build on that. We don't have to start from the beginning. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to modernize a lot of the material and expand it and incorporate the new information that's becoming available. That's all any mystic has ever done. Every mystic has always taught a lineage. There is no mystic that stands alone. Every mystic, even people that don't realize it, are connecting into a certain lineage of their past or a certain lineage with their spirit guides or development. Every mystic is teaching a lineage. We are building on top of each other. And when you pass, if you're a teacher, someone hopefully will pick up your work and evolve it and build on that as well. And that is what creates that stream of evolution. And it's really important to incorporate that, because there's also this movement in spirituality to delete all history. It's like, you know, how people are destroying historical statues or destroying certain buildings and things like that are historically important. And it's that's not how we heal. So there's this huge impulse to destroy anything that has existed and to just start fresh all the time. And that is a very dangerous idea, because everything is a continuum. And it's better to integrate and to spiritualize things, and it's better to modernize them than to completely throw them away. I hope this is making sense, but this is why I will suggest certain teachers or certain work, if this makes sense. Okay, here is the last question, you guys, and then we're going to do super chats and shout outs. So this question is from Giselle. Hey, Giselle. And you said, after we die, can we choose to go straight to the dimension of our higher self and be one with it? This is a great question. So death has always been the greatest mystery and a lot of people's greatest fear, honestly. But in the older tradition, since we are talking so much about psychic lineage and mystical lineage and traditional psychic teachings and all of this, one of the traditional psychic teachings that humanity has, or one of the traditional mystery teachings is the teachings about death. Now, these were in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and they were also in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They were also referenced in, I believe, Dante's work. When he talks about the different levels of hell. Hell wasn't meaning what it means today. And also in Gnosticism, you can also see it as well. So, and also in the Eastern traditions, okay? So when we pass away, there's actually a very precise system of decompression we go through. Again, this was alive in the temple cultures. It still is today, but it was taught openly to people thousands of years ago. Okay, this is what people knew. So there is a very precise system of decompression and kind of re-spiritualization that happens when we leave our body. And what this is we actually move through the different planetary spheres. Okay. This is often shown as, in the Eastern tradition, I believe it's shown or referenced as the lokas, Lokas. And in the books of the dead, they would actually give you these techniques and prayers, and you would actually train yourself to die. The reason why you could train yourself to die in all of these old esoteric traditions was because they knew what death was. They knew that you went through a certain process. So you could train yourself to go through that process in life, and that would help you pass. So when we pass away, we go through basically a series of what I would call decompressions. So the first one is associated with the moon, actually. And it's when we first sort of leave our being. Okay, we just leave, we pass and we're now leaving our body. And this is where we sort of have to look at ourselves. We often feel the things that we've done that were good, that were bad. There's that kind of traditional idea about death where we kind of have to reconcile a lot. We see a lot, but we kind of see it with like a slightly elevated perspective. This is also why the moon is called a mirror, and the moon is also called a lock, because certain soul essences can get trapped in this phase if they don't understand and they're not able to spiritualize themselves back into a higher condition. There are certain points where the soul can get kind of sticky or stuck. And a very large portion of the soul's energy can start reincarnating from the lower. And that's where the fragmentation happens. And that's why the moon is also called a lock. Because the planetaries, the planets around this, the planets that are around the Earth, the different densities that the planets represent as well, they sort of form like a layer cake around it, if you will. And so we want to pass through all of these different layers, and every layer and planetary sphere that we move through, we kind of gain something, and we also contribute something. So we take something from our life here and we do give it to Venus, we do give it to Mars, we do give it from whatever. So there is this sort of re-giving on the spiritual plane of truth and of wisdom and things like that. And then we go through it all, and then we come back down through it all again when we incarnate. So this is also why sometimes you'll hear in magical traditions that they can predict certain incarnations, and that actually soul incarnation is more of a science than anything. This is because the death process is a mystery to the profane or to the people who are normal. But then there's also people that remember these old traditions and or have studied them and have remembered them. So once you go through, just to directly answer your question here, once you go through your entire decompression and reintegration into the higher planes, you're still an individual though, by the way, you're still a soul. Once you do that, you will begin to devise for yourself a life that is going to allow you to continue to progress. The more advanced the soul is, the more integrated they are, the more higher level of initiation, the more kind of power they bring back as they come through all those planes. They kind of take more power with them as they incarnate. They bring more of that power. And then when you have a little bit of a less level, you're not quite at the higher stages. You kind of just ends up kind of just being like most of your energy is coming from the lower planes and recycling back through again and again and again. And so the goal is to obviously spiritualize, is obviously to become a complete and full individual through understanding that the kingdom of heaven is within. And that means that we are a full individual and that God is within us, that Christ consciousness is within us. And then we use that force to catalyze ourselves back upwards. And so I hope that answers your question. There's one more principle I think that could apply to this, Giselle, that just has come to my mind, which is that not everybody chooses the same kind of incarnational path. I believe Samuel Ainwar calls it the razor's edge. I don't know if that's him or if that's something that was before him, but there's this idea as well that there are some people who are more of like a warrior, and their evolution in the cosmos is that they will go into very difficult situations. They'll take on very difficult lives, and they're kind of choosing to evolve through entering challenging situations and having that compression really turn them into a diamond. It's kind of a dangerous way because you can absolutely fall. You know, we've heard about fallen angels, right? You can become a very high level soul and you can enter a lower planetary sphere that's very dense, and you can develop an ego and blind spots, and you can fall from your position, from your station, right? So that is also something to think about. We'll get more back into this like later, I think, in the year. But so there's very kind of heroic paths that you can take in the development of your soul. And then there's also paths that you can take that involve less incarnations, and you're sort of more on the outside, and you're helping more from the outside, so you don't take on as many incarnations. You're sort of on the outside, more of a guide. It takes a lot longer to evolve that way, but that is a path that some people do take, and it is just as valid as any other path. It's just whatever path you want to take. So I hope that answers your question, Giselle. And as always, you guys, it has been an amazing Sunday chat that we've had. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to do some super chat shout outs. Thank you so much for supporting me today. I greatly appreciate it. Dario, Darkangelo, Taiwana Beal, Smoke C, Perla Astorga, Luke Walker, Vanessa, Natalie Mannering, Doyle Wayne, Simone Nyman, Occult Fan, and Fibonacci. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, YouTube user 427. Thank you, Daniel Foster. I had such an amazing time with you guys. Just so you know, if you like this sort of more free-flowing format, I actually do this twice a month. I go for usually an hour longer than I am going to go today. I do this on my private platform. So on gigiyoung.com, you can sign up as a premium member. And what that gets you is you get like a whole social profile, social media account. You get access to forums where there's tons of like-minded people who are into mysticism. You know, they're into truth. They're part of the truth community. And it's just, there's all kinds of conversations. There's something called the reading room where you can give readings or you can request readings. There's a remote viewing game room that you can play with remote viewing. And it's just a really amazing community where you can hang out with like-minded people. There's no censorship. You can talk about whatever you want pretty much, you know, within reason. And you also get discounts on courses. So if you do plan on doing courses with me, then if you sign up as a premium member, you get discounts on those courses. And also any workshops that I'm doing in the future, you'll get a pretty hefty discount as well. And then I also do 2 live Q&As every month for about 3 to 3.5 hours we go for. And I just focus in on your questions. So whatever you want to know. And all of those Q&As are also archived. So if you're a member, you can watch years of archived videos as well. So that really helps me out. That allows me to continue to make free content and stuff like that. So just a little reminder that Mars Mysteries is starting up on Thursday. I can't wait to release the newest episode that I have. So look out for that. Oh, and also sign up for my newsletter where you can become aware when I'm going live like this on YouTube, or if I'm releasing a course or something, or just whatever else. Maybe I just want to say hi. I don't know. But if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll definitely be in the know. So that's it. That's my spiel. I hope you guys have an amazing Sunday. I know I did. Thank you so much for being with me. And I will see you in our next stream.